Welcome to the BSS DCP-555 single room custom configuration video. In this video, we will step through what is involved to configure the DCP-555 for a single conference room application. Before moving on, take a moment to watch the BSS DCP-555 web interface overview video if you haven't already. It provides a comprehensive overview of the available options within the interface. Once logged in to the DCP-555, to begin a new configuration, click on the Create New button and provide it with a meaningful name such as Conference Room Demo. Next, click on the newly created Conference Room Demo file to open up the schematic view. The schematic view is where we handle the setup of the inputs, outputs, mixing, and signal routing. Let's start by setting up the input sources. Our sources will consist of two microphones, a 2-channel USB input for applications such as WebEx or Skype, and a VoIP line that will allow for integration of call managers such as Cisco Unified Communications Manager. Please note that while a VoIP line is being accounted for in this audio configuration, detailed information regarding your VoIP system must be entered under the VoIP settings. There you will find access to general settings as well as VoIP line settings for each line. These values should be attained through the VoIP Network Administrator. Once entered, the Reconfigure button must be pressed to save the changes. To access the VoIP line dialer, the displayed IP address associated with the VoIP line may be used in a web browser without accessing the rest of the configuration. The first 12 inputs support acoustic echo cancellation, also known as AEC, so any microphones used for conferencing should be placed here. At input 1, let's click Add New Input. At the top of the Configured Channel window, we can provide a channel name such as Mic 1. For the input type, we will select Analog, and then assign the corresponding channel. This input selection corresponds to the physical mic line connections on the rear of the unit. Let's select Input 1 from the available 16 mic line inputs. Phantom power is available for condenser microphones needing it, and preamp gain may be adjusted in 2 dB steps. A 4-band parametric EQ and high-pass filter are available to each input, but we'll leave those alone for now. As mentioned before, AEC is available on the first 12 inputs, so we can turn that on considering this microphone will be used for conferencing. Please be aware of the other settings such as nonlinear processing and auto gain control. Nonlinear processing, also known as NLP, works to remove any residual echo not removed by the linear part of the AEC algorithm. At its most aggressive setting of 80%, there exists a risk of degraded audio from the near side. A setting of 0% will more than likely result in echo being heard at the far side. It is recommended to start at the default of 42%. If intending on routing the microphone through an auto mixer, it is recommended that the auto gain control be left in its off state. Next, we can follow the same steps for mic 2. Any parameter values such as EQ can always be adjusted later by coming back to this screen. Now we need to account for our USB and VoIP sources. To avoid taking up any of our AEC channels, let's select Input Channel 13. Channels 13 through 28 feature parametric EQ and compression, as well as the ability to be made into stereo pairs, but do not provide echo cancellation. Let's name this USB left, select USB for the input type, and assign Input 1. Next, select Input 14, and here we'll assign the second USB channel. Name it USB right, select USB, and assign Channel 2. Now notice the controls are separate. We want the channels 13 and 14 to work together considering they're a stereo pair. So let's go back to the Configure Channel page for the USB left channel and turn on the stereo input. This may take a few seconds to complete. We are doing this because it's entirely possible that audio received over USB is in stereo. Even though conference rooms are typically set in a mono configuration, we want to make sure that both channels are present as to not lose any audio detail. When assigned to a mono output, the stereo channels will then be summed together. After channels 13 and 14 are linked together, we'll find all light controls share the same parameter values. Finally, we'll round out our initial input configuration by assigning VoIP line 1 to input channel 15. Moving on to the output configuration, we'll set up one analog output that will be used to feed the room amplifier, a USB output to send audio back on a web conference call, and a VoIP output. As expected, configuring the outputs is very similar to configuring the inputs. At output channel 1, we'll click Add New Output and provide a name such as Program 1. Select Analog for the output type and choose one of the 8 available analog outputs, such as channel 1. We'll then assign output 2 to USB 1 and 2 in order to provide audio to the far side on a web conference call. After selecting USB channel 1 as the output type for output 2 and providing it with a proper name, we will then use the option Duplicate this output. You'll notice 2 instances of output 2 labeled USB. Click on the second instance, select USB as the output type, and select channel 2. We've now just created a dual mono output, meaning whatever is routed to USB channel 1 is also duplicated to USB channel 2. Finally, output channel 3 will account for our VoIP output. Let's name it, select the type, and then choose line 1. Now we are ready to configure how the inputs will be routed to the outputs, or in other words, how the inputs will be combined together at each output. We'll refer to these as mix minuses. The reason being is because each output is going to receive a mix of the sources minus one or several sources. Take the Program 1 output for example. Typically, conference rooms are small enough to not require the local microphones to be heard in the local loudspeakers, so the program output in this case will just reinforce the USB and VoIP inputs. We can select Program 1 and all inputs will display on-off selections. We can then enable the USB and VoIP sources. Selecting a source that has been routed somewhere will then display which output paths it has been routed to. For this simple room configuration, we will only need to use the Conference Room 1 auto mixer. This will take any desired microphone sources connected to the DCP-555, mix them, and then route them to the desired location, either local or to the far side. As indicated earlier, we'll just route them to the far side. We'll choose the Conference Room 1 gain sharing auto mixer and enable our 2 microphones. This routes the microphones through the mixer first and ensures an overall better sounding intelligible mix for the voice reinforcement being routed to the USB and VoIP outputs. With the Conference Room 1 mixer still selected, we'll then enable both the USB and VoIP outputs so those participating in a conference call using either form of communication may hear those located physically in the conference room. Now we need to configure what is an AEC reference, or in other words, where the echo will be removed. We accomplish this with the available AEC reference groups. Since we're just working with a single conference room, we'll select AEC reference group 1. Next, we'll allocate which AEC microphones belong to this group, and then we'll select our reference sources so that they are not heard by the microphones and echoed back to the far side. It's that simple. Although changes are saved in real time, you can also use the Save and Save As functions located in the upper right corner. This concludes our demo of configuring the DCP-555 for a single room. Thanks for watching.